Welcome to JF with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. Today, we have our returning guest, Scott Baugh, Republican representative for California 47th. He is extremely busy, election in 4 days, joining us from the car this morning. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Daniel, it's always good to be with you. I love your energy. I love your enthusiasm and your intellect.
Thank you so much. So I'll just tell listeners, I've now had about 5 or 6 different conversations with you in various living rooms around Orange County. I really did a 180 on you. I mean, I remember emailing you 6-7 months ago. I emailed Nick, the campaign manager, and basically said, I'm almost certainly going to vote Democrat, but I would love to have a conversation with you. As opposed to brushing me off, you basically, of course, invited me in. We got coffee in your office, and we've now talked several times since then. And I really have changed my opinion. And I'll just say, I've been posting around in, Jewish community forums and on social media that I've been at events with you, and also that I was going to interview you. And you're quite the polarizing figure. I would say you're at about, anecdotally 50-50 of people saying, oh my God, that's amazing you're talking to him, and 50% of people saying, how are you even talking to him? How dare you? So I'm excited to get into some issues that hopefully will maybe mitigate some of their concerns. But I wanted to thank you again for making time here.
You're welcome, and thank you, Daniel. I do find that very interesting that there are so many people, as you note. Polarizing is an interesting word because a lot of people have an opinion of me, but don't know who I am at all. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and share with your listeners and viewers exactly who I am and what I believe.
Perfect. So let's start with the attack ads, right? Because I am probably in the exact demographic where your opposition is spending ad money. I cannot start a YouTube video, whether it's watching, MLB World Series highlights or just, prepping for a video that I was going to show my class at UC Irvine, without an ad popping up talking about how Scott Baugh supports a nationwide abortion ban. And I don't think I'm alone here. Many students that I actually talked to about you have said, oh, he's the anti-abortion guy. And that's really where the attack ads are at. I would love to just give you a chance, what is your position on abortion, national ban, everything there?
Yeah, well, thank you, Daniel. And I've done some videos myself explaining my position on this, but fundamentally, I believe in life, and I hope that everybody respects that as my personal belief. A lot of people have a personal belief that's other than that about when life begins and all that, but I have a value of life, but that doesn't mean I impose that value on you. This is what I believe. And my opponent's out there trying to scare everybody, saying that I want to do a national abortion ban. And that's just simply not true. I would vote against a national abortion ban because I think the federal government would be a terrible arbiter of what the policy should be for the entire country. A one-size-fits-all solution rarely works. And, we had that with Roe versus Wade, and we had, controversy with that for 30 years. And so I think the states right now are sorting this out. And in California, the national or the Constitution, it's embedded, it's enshrined in our Constitution, a woman's right to choose and women's health. And so I think it would be a mistake for the federal government to step in and change what the voters of California have already decided. And so there's just, call them liars, call them people saying things that are not true. But the bottom line is not true what they're saying in those ads. I would vote against a national abortion ban.
Just to push you a little bit more, there's been, very stunning cases of people, say in Montana or Texas or other countries that have been very harsh on abortion, of cases where either the law is not clear or there's some, again, this is probably all muddled in bureaucracy, but, doctors in an emergency room don't exactly know what the law is, so they're hesitant to give care to pregnant women who are experiencing some complication. And there's been some, very high profile, very sad cases. This leads a lot of people to think, okay, there's kind of 3 positions, at least, you can disagree if, with this clarification. There's national abortion ban, there's national abortion, okay, and then there's leave it up to the states. Is there room for another position of saying there needs to be some national protection? Maybe the bar is very high for what includes that, but would you support any type of national protection? So if, I don't know, let's pick our favorite state. If Montana decides in their state they vote in a, an abortion ban, let's say it's very strict, 4 to 6 weeks, no exception for a lot of other things post that. Is there room for a national protection in certain cases where, there's medical issues. Maybe it's not life-threatening medical issues, but, damaging to the future of the mother. I'm curious what you think about those cases.
Well, so right now, Florida has, I think, a 6-week ban or something like that. I would default to letting the states decide. And I know the states are working through that. And in some cases where the mother's life is in danger, I know in Texas had a case like that was awkward. The lady went to another state to have an abortion. The states are working through that. It's the ambiguity of the law, not the intent of the lawmakers that created that problem. And I think they will clean those things up to make it very clear. When the life of the mother is in danger, that's established medical jurisprudence that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, that you always can protect the life of the mother. And so I think that's just an unfortunate interpretation problem, and those statutes will all get clarified.
Got it. So just zooming out a little bit, and this isn't news for you, but just for listeners, there's been an interesting political realignment that's been happening. The New York Times just reported last week that now voting breaks down more by gender than at any other time in history. I can certainly say anecdotally, it's interesting. This is my 4th election that I've been on a college campus for. And the last 3 elections, I was basically able to assume that everybody was voting Democrat with a, 5-to-1 odd. Now it really does break down by gender a lot more. Obviously this is anecdotal, but also it fits the wider statistics. I'm curious why you think we're having this political realignment in America with more men voting Republican, more women voting Democrat. What do you think is the root cause of this? And I would also argue, just for listeners that haven't seen the statistic before, this is true across class and across ethnic groups also. And so the biggest predictor of whether one will vote for either, Trump or Harris is actually by gender than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is the woman's right to choose issue is part of that. But broadly speaking, I think that if you looked at my campaign, Daniel, you'll see that I'm talking about fentanyl. You see that I'm talking about a secure border. Well, a lot of women are very open to the message of me addressing the fentanyl issue. I mean, you just spend a few moments talking to a mother who has lost a teenage son or daughter from a poisoning of fentanyl, and it'll tear your heart out. The point is that we need to talk about issues that men care about. We need to talk about issues that women care about. And I think sometimes the Republican Party has been sort of less focused and less like tone deaf on talking about some of those issues. But when I talk about them, I get overwhelmingly good response from women, and even women who disagree with what I personally believe about life. But they're open to me on all these other things that I actually care about, that they also care about. So the whole point is this, that we need to find areas of commonality where we need to make progress. And when we do that, we don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree on things that make the American way of life better.
Got it. I appreciate that. And, we talked probably 5 months ago. I was trying to figure out the exact date. Since then, obviously, a lot has changed with the Middle East, right? Iran attacked Israel again. Israel retaliated. Lebanon, I don't even know if the Lebanon front really started when we were talking back in March. Obviously, the war in Gaza is still there. It seems like the Democrats have picked almost the worst set of policies, both electorally, fine, but also just strategically. I mean, there might have been an argument to make a year ago saying Israel shouldn't try to solve this militarily. Okay, I probably would disagree with that, but that's at least an opinion. There also is another view saying Israel should do this very quickly and America should fully back it. And, you have to just remove the cancer that is Hamas or Hezbollah, or even, potential, regime change in Iran as quick as possible. It seems like the Biden administration has kind of tried to do both or neither at the same time, right? They've obviously been on Israel's side, right? I don't think Biden is anti-Israel by any stretch, but they've put these weird roadblocks that has just made it, that's just slowed Israel down, right? So we had the Biden administration saying, don't go into Rafah, don't go into Rafah. And then, of course, that's the Hamas stronghold. That's where Sinwar was. That's where most of the hostages were, right? Similarly with Lebanon, right? Like, don't bomb certain parts of Beirut. All of a sudden, turns out that's where the Hezbollah stronghold was, and the head of Hezbollah was there. I'm curious how you think a Republican Congress would differ from a Democrat Congress in terms of wider Middle East policy, in terms of future of Iran, future with Hezbollah, the Houthis. You can sort of take that question however you want.
Yeah. Your video, your audio just went out a little bit. Can you still hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a great question.
And I think it's rooted the inconsistency, if you will, that in the Democratic Party is rooted in a party that believes in identity politics. So identity politics puts an ethnicity or an identity over a value or a principle. And so when you go down the path of identity politics, that's how the Democrats have been co-opted. And you allow all of these fringe groups come in to be anti-Semitic, and somehow they want to protect that in the name of identity politics, because every person or every group gets promoted in their party. Well, if you promote identity politics as a policy, there's no room for principle. And so the whole point on you ask about a Democrat versus a Republican controlled Congress, we believe in the principle of freedom. We believe it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are. We believe in freedom. We believe in opportunity. We believe in human rights, and we believe in democracy. We believe in the right of Israel to exist. And so when we believe that fundamentally, it dictates our policies. So we're not confused on condemning Iran. We're not confused on condemning Hamas. We're not confused on condemning Hezbollah. We operate under principles. So I think that's how you're going to see the biggest difference. We're not confused about it.
So I asked you this a couple months ago, but I want to re-ask it because I think the question has sort of recirculated a little bit. And I've actually been hearing this concern from more Jews, not necessarily voting Congress, but voting for president, that the isolationist wing of the Republican Party is growing, and that there might be, sort of the Rand Paul, maybe J.D. Vance type isolationist view of one day saying, even if in theory, morally we're on the side of Israel, why does Israel need X, Y, or Z money in weapon aids and everything like that? I'm curious, would you unequivocally sort of shut down any of those type of isolationist arguments when it comes to Israel? Would you sort of always vote, I mean, within reason, always vote for, the aid packages to Israel and such?
Well, that's an interesting question. Of course, I believe in intellectual hospitality, so I wouldn't shut down any argument. I would listen to it. But the point is, I would give the counter argument, and I would prevail on that. Listen, it's different when you're talking about, I mean, not every conflict that's foreign is the same. I think the conflict in Ukraine is very different than the conflict in Israel. And so when you have some of these isolationists that you're talking about, what's different now is we have bigger budget concerns now than we did before. So we have these massive deficits. We have $35 trillion in debt. And a real question has to be raised. It's like, are we spending our money prudently? Is there enough accountability? And so those are proper questions, even from people who are more isolationist. So you don't want to reject it just because you're perceived as an isolationist, or they are. What you want to do is evaluate every circumstances for the merits of that circumstance. And in Israel, I think it's no question that we would continue to give that aid. Israel is in the front line of the attack on America. And an attack on Israel is an attack on America, period. And anti-Semitic conversations and actions in America is anti-American action in America. And so I see them as really one and the same. We're not confused about it at all. And so whatever we need to do to help protect our friend Israel and protect that democracy in Israel, we need to do.
A lot of people are surprised with the mainstream now Republican, 2024 position on Ukraine. I mean, I think it was at least one of the more stunning portrayals of that was Trump at the debate with Harris. What was it, 6 weeks ago, where I think he was asked point blank, do you want Russia to lose the war? And he gave an answer that, I mean, was sort of not really answering the question. He said, I want people to stop dying. Without even getting into your opinion necessarily on aid to Ukraine, what do you think accounts for this shift? I mean, I imagine if you dig someone up from 1995 and tell them that the Republicans now would be less harsh on Russia than the Democrats, they would probably be confused. One, do you agree with that characterization? And two, I'm just curious what you think is causing this.
Well, interesting question. I don't think they're less harsh on Russia. I don't think it's a situation where they think Putin is any less dangerous than he's always been. I think you have an odd situation with Ukraine, where you've had a history of corruption, you've had a history of spending over there without accountability, and so all these folks that are worried about our own debt, they're saying, well, why are we spending hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars that we don't know how they're actually being spent, fighting for a war that we're not engaged in. We're just funding, really. And so they're legitimate questions to have. But it's not an assumption that Putin got nicer or got less evil. That's not it at all. It's more of, let's evaluate both sides of this equation and figure out where we really want to be. And if we determine that Putin wants to go to Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia and Poland and wants to continue to expand his march, well, then we give the benefit of the doubt more to Ukraine. But if we're able to isolate Putin and keep him kind of where he is, well, then there's less of a I guess, a burning desire to go in and to fight him. It doesn't mean we think he's less evil. We just have to make some priorities.
Is that true even with the background of this sort of standing for freedom argument? Meaning, if China attacks Taiwan, in 2 years from now, it doesn't really affect, I mean, maybe it'll be harder to get, microchips or something like that for a couple of years, but it doesn't really affect America in terms of, if I'm, a lower class American and I'm worried about putting food on the table, from some perspective, it doesn't matter. But historically, it seems like America sort of has been that beacon of almost the world's policeman for freedom. Do you see America? I mean, is this just necessary that America's changing from that role? Is the world too complicated?
I don't think America's changing. I think there's some prudence going on. I think America is engaged in a lot of conflicts that it shouldn't have. And so we need to be more prudent on where we decide to engage. But I imagine if China attacked Taiwan, that would be challenging for many folks. But I think America would protect Taiwan. I think even protecting Ukraine is a message to Xi that, hey, America is not going to sit back and let these giant countries that want to dominate other countries just come in willy-nilly and take them over. So I don't know, Daniel. It's a really good question. I have to give it some more thought. But I think it's just every situation is different. It needs to be evaluated based upon the merits of that situation. And I really think because of our deficit at $35 trillion and growing $2 trillion a year, I think it makes that analysis more necessary and say, do we really belong here? Do we really belong doing this much money? It doesn't mean we don't do anything, but we really have to have a different kind of analysis given our debt situation.
Sure. So zooming back, crossing back over the Atlantic, back to America, even in Orange County, I'm sure that you saw all the controversy over the Santa Ana ethnic studies curriculum that came out a couple of months ago. I did a whole episode, explaining to listeners what exactly had happened, but I think it's connected to this broader California ethnic studies curriculum, which really on two levels bothers me. And then I want to hear, what, if anything, you can do to address it. One, I've become just convinced in the last year the entire DEI way of seeing the world is just antithetical to any type of progress. Dividing people based off of ethnicity just doesn't seem like it's ever going to work and ever going to usher us into a better future. And so even if right now things aren't fully equal opportunity for every group, it makes more sense to pursue more universalistic platforms. That's my opinion on one level. The second is DEI, the apparatus always seems to screw Jews. We see this on campus. We see this, really in any group, usually when people are worried about the DEI wider, bureaucratic machine, it always ends up, Jews end up getting thrown off the bus and, colonizers or white supremacists. This is really coming to a head in the California ethnic studies curriculum, where now you have ingrained within middle schools and high schools, and I'm sure this will eventually come into the, colleges, basically teachers teaching people what I believe to be lies about history, and not just lies about history, anti-Semitic lies about history. I'm curious if there's a role of the federal government to come in and basically say, hey, we are giving you tax money, public schools. And so, okay, great. Probably most of us are happy with the idea that we have, universal sixth grade, but that comes with certain stipulations of, I even remember from the 90s, big debates about, can you teach creationism in schools? Okay, well, in the same vein, can you teach lies about history? I mean, can you have a teacher saying that the only connection of Jews to Israel is colonialism? And what might the government be able to do to step in and say, hey, if these public schools are going to be teaching lies and anti-Semitic lies and, even potentially anti-Israel and also anti-American lies, to what extent can the federal government come and say, you have to stop that?
It's a great question, but it goes back to an earlier answer I gave you. Whenever you pursue policies of identity politics, you've thwarted the ability to draw a bead on the right principle. And when the government steps in and tries to pick winners and losers, tell me what extra knowledge the government has or possesses that gives them the right to determine who the winner and loser should be. And so you inevitably end up with harsh and weird circumstances and its own form of the promotion of prejudice at some level. DEI promotes prejudice against certain groups because you have somebody trying to figure out, well, who is the favored group today? And when you have a government bureaucrat trying to figure out the favored group, you're necessarily going to discriminate against the unfavored group. And that's not the role of government at all. That is the opposite of America and the American way of life. It's the opposite of meritocracy. We saw this with the discrimination against Asians in higher education. You know, the Asian community as a culture, more diligent maybe in homework and more diligent in getting good grades and more focused on that. Well, if you have the best grade, you should get the best slot. You shouldn't ever be in a situation where you say, well, there's too many Asians. That's crazy. We are a meritocracy and we promote merit. And whenever you have a government bureaucrat trying to figure out what the right mix or the right outcome is, you will end up with racism and prejudice and terrible outcomes that are contrary to the American way of life.
But now we have the teachers' unions, which I would argue are probably even worse than the government in terms of bureaucracy and corruption. I mean, you just look at what the National Teachers Union is doing. I mean, protecting teachers that are getting horrible scores year after year, fomenting a lot of this insanity. And so, okay, I get there's an epistemological problem of like, who do you cede the expertise to? But it seems like right now, right? And I'm not saying, you know, what DeSantis is doing in Florida is the answer, but that's, you know, in my opinion, that's sort of the other side of this, right? You know, it's either we let these teachers unions that are getting captured by more fringe ideologies continue to teach all of our 8th graders in local public schools, or we have to have a government coming in and top down saying, you know, this is kosher, this is not kosher. I mean, what is there to do to fix this? Because, you know, I don't want my future children to go to a middle school where their entire unit on the Middle East is going to be learning about, you know, the big bad Jews coming in and, you know, stealing land from the poor Palestinians.
Well, I'm having a difficulty hearing some of your audio, and I'm not sure what the question is here, Daniel. But I will say you're right, is the left to its own devices and government left to its own devices will produce some pretty weird outcomes. Outcomes, for example, where the schools or the teachers have greater rights than the parents. I mean, what kind of world is that where some bureaucrat or some teacher or some administrator somehow thinks they know what's better for my child than I do, especially if they're going through some gender dysphoria issue? It's like the parent is the number one person that should be in that room when their child is going through that confusion. And on the other side, you know, the American Psychological Association and Psychiatrist Association, all these, they're promoting this affirmation of gender dysphoria. Why would that ever be a good outcome? And so that's what happens when you let and when I say teachers union or whatever, there's a lot of great teachers. This isn't a bash on teachers at all. But when you have a bureaucracy that is trying to pursue an agenda that's contrary to the interest of the parents, well, then you have a very bad situation and needs to be addressed and needs to be changed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, listen, I've seen this firsthand with graduate student unions, you know, happening at UC Irvine and other campuses. So we only have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and then I'll let you get home from your event at Crystal Cove. Two last issues real quick. One of the things that I've noticed as just an interested political observer is now the Republicans are much more willing to question corporations than maybe they were 20 years ago. I think you really see this with the merging of Trump and RFK, especially RFK's sort of plan to make America healthy again, where he's specifically talking about, you know, big food, big pharma, you know, big agriculture, all of that. I'm curious, you know, from your standpoint of Congress, where do you, you know, what do you think about RFK's, you know, without getting into any specific, you know, policies? It really does seem like, you know, the mixture of him and you know, maybe Elon Musk is going to come in and really radically change the way we view a lot of these, you know, I'll say government handouts to say big pharma and big agriculture that are creating these ultra processed food and chemicals and hormone disruptors. And this is something that I know that a lot of young people, even if they're not going to go so far as to vote for the Trump RFK, JD Vance ticket, they are thinking about, microplastics and hormone disruptors. And I'm curious what you think Congress can do to make it so that, I don't know, American food isn't the most unhealthy. I mean, I know you've heard this before, but we spend the most amount of money on healthcare and we don't have the results. From my opinion, it's not because our doctors are bad, and it's not because Americans are ethnically or genetically less healthy. It's because our food looks completely different than Europe. I mean, you buy a bag of Doritos in Europe, right? The same Doritos, and the ingredients are completely different in terms of the high fructose corn syrup and the dyes. So I'm curious what you think about this wider landscape shifting and what you might be able to do in Congress to make sure that we become a healthier country.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm excited that this is now even a question and part of the dialogue, because I do think that we've sort of like gone too far the other way in trying to like just have medicine fix everything as opposed to health. Our bodies are amazing at solving their own problem, and they're less amazing at having all this interference, these foreign substances being introduced into our diets and all that. I always find it amazing. You go to Europe and you can eat a lot, and you don't gain weight, right? Because the food is better. It's pure. It's like it's more authentic. And I love the conversation that RFK has brought to the table. I think I saw a couple of doctors being interviewed on a Tucker Carlson show that was kind of interesting, where they're talking about big pharma makes most of their money making sure people are sick. And it's like, that's how they make money. If people are sick and they need all these treatments, and it doesn't mean all medicines are bad. It means that we need to take a step back and evaluate, what are we doing to our bodies? What are we actually doing to promote real health? Because I think your statement about we have the most expensive healthcare system and we don't have the best healthcare outcomes tells you so much that we're doing something wrong, and we need to have this national dialogue and figure it out.
Yeah, just for listeners, that was Callie and Casey Means. One of them is a surgeon. One of them used to be a part of, big food, and now they've spent their life, on this, pro health crusade. I was actually, it's funny because on my list I had, Tucker Carlson, as a question to ask you, but I didn't because we were running out of time. But because you brought him up, this is one thing that the Jewish community is concerned about, the Tucker Carlson-like people. Obviously, a couple months ago, he hosted sort of a Holocaust revisionist historian, and then, it seems like he's still accepted within the mainstream of the Republican. Where do you think somebody like him and a lot of his views that, again, nobody's views are all evil or great, but clearly I think he has overstepped, at least in my opinion, to anti-Semitism, despite the fact that, it's an interesting podcast when he hosts, Callie and Casey Means. What does the Republican Party do with someone like Tucker Carlson?
I think it's the same thing you do with the Democratic Party, or people that are promoting a woke philosophy that somehow government knows the best answers. I think truth is the antidote to wokeism. I think truth is the antidote to any lies that are perpetuated about the Holocaust and Jews. We just need to continue to speak the truth. And so I'm not sure what else you would say about that. You would counter what you know to be right. And this is all about intellectual hospitality. We don't agree with everybody on everything, but what we're able to do is say, no, that's not true. That's not what history really shows. Here's what history really shows. And we need people like you and me out there to continue to speak that truth.
Okay, well, election is in 4 days. You are currently leading in the polls. What is the last message, going into the weekend before the election for people that maybe are still on the fence, maybe that, don't really see why it's important to vote in our local election and don't have strong opinions? What is your last message to potential voters?
My last message is, I believe in you. I believe in the American people. I believe that there's no problem that we have that the American people can't solve. I don't think government is the right solution, but government does have certain roles, like securing our border and protecting the people and protecting our democracy. And part of that is protecting and being allies with the state of Israel. But I think we need to secure our border, stop the flow of fentanyl in here. We need to enforce our criminal statutes. We need to quit being soft on crime, and we need to get our spending under control. And I think that you're going to see with a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate that we're gonna solve these problems. And I would hope you would get out and vote early. And if your tradition is to vote on election day, do that. But let's make sure you vote. Let's make sure you participate, because that's what makes our democracy, our republic, very strong.
Scott Baugh, thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel.